Hey there, Dr. Mel here. I'm coming on here to share with you in light of what has happened in 2020 when it comes to racial injustice. And I came on here to share with you some of the work that I'm doing, and simply as a means for holding myself accountable to doing the daily work that's uncomfortable. I have been really tuning in to some of my Black mentors who have been my mentors for a long time, and I've been listening to them. I've been studying and restudying the history of slavery, the history of racism, the history of racial injustices, not only in America, but all across the globe. And one of my mentors, Leo, suggested that we as white people look at where we have benefited in our life from racial oppression and from racism. Whether you're consciously aware of it or not, those of us who are white automatically benefit because of the system and the way that it's been created on oppression. And so I was looking at this and I was journaling about it and writing down all of the ways that I have benefited from racial oppression. And this exercise isn't meant to put you into blame and shame and not take action, but really it's to help you become aware. Because the first step in creating systemic and systematic change is to actually just acknowledge and become aware of the way things are, however that makes you feel. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's a good sign. So I was doing my work and looking at where have I benefited personally from racial oppression. And it brought me back to a time that I want to share with you. And the reason why I share this all with you is because I feel as though personal stories that come from the heart and those of us doing our work can perhaps inspire you to do your work as well. Day by day. This isn't a quick fix, as you all know, and what I teach about health and healing and transformation, it's not a quick fix. Although we do live in a culture and a system that really desires quick fix. And I have my own theories behind that, but I think a lot of it too is the longevity of things. It's uncomfortable, it can be messy, and you're gonna mess up. But you got to commit to the long run. So my part of committing to the long run and being an ally that's not just performative is to share with you what I'm learning as a white person, not dependent on my Black colleagues, Black friends, Black mentors to educate me, because that's not their job. So I'm reflecting, I'm sitting there writing and journaling, and it comes to me this experience I had when I had traveled to the Dominican Republic when I was about 21 or 22 years old. And it was one of those Americanized resorts. Some of you probably have been to one yourself and benefited yourself. You know, one of those really tropical resorts on the beach. It's super nice, all inclusive, right? And all the workers there are generally people who are local and live on the island or in the area. This specific area we had been to was the Dominican Republic. Now, I had been to the Dominican Republic, or had planned on going to the Dominican Republic for mission work, which is a whole other form of benefiting off of racial oppression. But this moment in particular was on a vacation in which my mom's friends were going, and they wanted to invite us, Michael and I. And I remember after having dinner one night, and it's evident that all the people that are working there are locals to the area. So they were Dominican, and they're super sweet, super amazing. And I speak a little bit of Spanish, so it was really fun to connect with them in their actual cultural language. And I remember chatting with this gentleman in Spanish about how much he makes working at the resort and how much he works, and about his family. And he had some younger children that he was working to take care of. And he told me that his days went from 6 a.m. when breakfast started. In fact, he probably got there sooner. So he was getting up at 4 a.m. and he worked until dinner was done, which was 9 p.m. So that's, if you do the math right, that's a 15-hour day. So he's working 15-hour days. And I think he said he worked 5 to 6 days a week. So he only had maybe one day off to be with his children. And I asked him, you know, how much do you make a month? Like, I'm just curious if you feel comfortable. You work so hard, you're sacrificing your family life to be here, and you're just working around the clock. Like, what are you making per month? And he told me that he was making $283 American dollars a month. Not a day, not a week, $283 a month. Now, I did the math on this. And listen, I get that there are different standards of living. There's different ways the economy runs. I get that the resort could be perceived as providing opportunities for people in the area to work. But at what cost? To get paid less than minimum wage? I mean, beyond the poverty line? Below the poverty line? And you know, this is a third world country, right? So that's all in perspective and relative. But $283 a month equates to about 6,000 pesos, 6,100 pesos a month. Now, if you've ever traveled to the Caribbean or Mexico or Latin America, Central America, Latin America, the Caribbean, pesos range depending on their currency exchange, the exchange rate there, but ultimately it's relatively the same. And 6,000 pesos down there is not that much. If you've ever traveled down there, you see things priced out as like, this is 500 pesos, this is 1,000 pesos. And that's just your traditional like grocery shopping and gas, right? I think to fill up on a couple liters, a lot of them drive mopeds down there because it's way more economically efficient and cheaper. I think to fill up your gas tank, it was 1,200 pesos. So he would be using about 18% of his paycheck just on gas if he even had a moped. So my point in all this is that I myself, Dr. Mel Krug, have personally benefited because I had a great time at that resort. Those people were amazing. We had fun. We went to those excursions that you leave the resort and you go on those excursions, another form of Americanized, and really let's just call it what it is. Americanized is oppression. It's oppression, right? Another form of oppression, benefiting off of the expense of someone else's livelihood, right? And again, I don't know what their lives are like. I don't know what the cost of living is like down there, but I can tell you $283 a month in America ain't gonna cut it. And I get that things are more expensive here, but my point is I myself, Dr. Mel Krug, have benefited from racial oppression. Does that feel good to admit? No. Was my intention going to this resort with my family to stand on top of racial oppression and say, I am racially oppressing people? No. But that's part of the acknowledgement and the awareness, is actually being able to recognize your actions. And as my mentor Leo was saying, that spoon of sugar, that spoon of toxin that you take, at what cost? Okay, and I'm not here to get political. I'm not here to choose sides. But what I am saying is that racial oppression is real. And it's not just real in America. When a lot of people think of slavery, they think of the slaves in Africa that were kidnapped. Hundreds of thousands of people kidnapped and came to America. Well, we forget, and I don't remember learning this in history, and if I did, I've forgotten it, and so that's why I'm doing the work, is relearning my history in all sides, not just Eurocentric from a European and white perspective, but from all perspectives. There were slaves who were essentially kidnapped from Africa, who weren't just taken to America, but to the Caribbean, so African Caribbean slaves, to Mexico, to Latin America. And so slavery doesn't just exist in America, it exists globally, in which we have benefited from that, like directly, as white people. Does that feel good to admit? No, but the reason I share this is because when I started learning about that form of history, and not just in America, but globally, I realized that that was an experience that I had as a young 20-year-old female, where I was directly benefiting from racial oppression. This man, I remember asking him too, how often are you seeing your children? How often are you actually being able to hang out with your kids? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and he said, whenever I can. At night when I get home, which is 10 o'clock. Like, most kids aren't up past 10 o'clock. And even then, they can't contribute to that love and connection with you. So I share this because, you know, a lot of spiritual leaders will say, well, their soul was born and incarnated in that. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, there's some degree of whatever you want to believe with that. And at the same time, we as human beings in our three-dimensional world, there's ways that you are benefiting, I guarantee it, from racial oppression. And a lot of it might be subconscious because it's so ingrained in our culture and it's so ingrained in our system that you don't even recognize it. So I invite you, I share this story because I invite you to start to look at where you are directly benefiting from racial oppression. And if you don't know what the words racial oppression mean, look it up. Look up the definition of things. It's okay. Again, we can't depend on our Black colleagues and our people of color, our friends and our coworkers and our family members and our neighbors. We can't depend on them to be the history teachers. We can't depend on them to be the teachers because they're exhausted. We got to do the work. We got to do the work. And part of that first step of doing the work is acknowledging where you have benefited in a system that is founded on racial oppression. We can take this beyond just race. There are many forms of oppression and suppression and repression. Sex trafficking, womanization, patriarchy, capitalism. I can go into all these things, but I don't want this to get political, although it seems to be turning political in our world right now. My point with all this is it starts with you. It starts with you choosing to look at your choices, your actions, where you benefited, and are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to let go of things that you've benefited from, that you're addicted to? Because that thing that you're addicted to is actually founded upon dehumanization, really. Are you willing to give that up? Listen, for me, when I go on vacations and things like that, I actually prefer to stay at like a local house, like in the actual neighborhoods, in the culture, to experience the culture. Because then guess what? I go to the market myself. I go to the cafes myself. I'm not depending on someone to feed me and to do all these things. Are those resorts fun? Yeah, but at what cost? I mean, to me, I've always had a weird vibe around them. And now I know why. It's this. It's that story I shared with you. So my invitation is to do the work. Take a couple minutes a day to learn about the history of America, of slavery, of racial oppression, of the injustices that our country has within its system. Something that I'm dedicated to every day is learning about how the brain perceives trauma, because a lot of this instills trauma in the nervous system. And I'm committed to being not just a performative ally, but an ally every day that does some form of work, that learns about the history, that takes responsibility, not just depending on people to spoon feed it to me, but doing the work myself and putting the effort in. So I hope this encourages you. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Again, part of this work too is sitting back and listening to the voices that need to be heard, because I don't know everything. I'm white. I have no idea how people of color experience it, but I can listen, I can learn, I can acknowledge and say, look, I don't know everything, but I'm here with you. I stand with you and I want to learn. And that's the beginning of change, is that awareness, an acknowledgement, and acceptance. I love you all. Thanks for tuning in. Do the work with me. Let's make this place and this globe a place that everyone is accepted. Peace, love.